Um, Afternoon, everyone. My name is Buntu Siakuzukisa Mnyaga, uzikhala umbizana George Tiya Kusolobendonga, otherwise known as George by some people. I'll be the facilitator for this first session, which is going to be very brief, and I must apologize for that because we started close to about an hour late. Let me greet firstly those online. I apologize for the upside down protocol, but I think I'll be forgiven because of time purposes. With that being said, I greet the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack, as well as the collective of the University Management, Senior Management, who others are online, the res managers of the respective residents that are here, and the staff of Student Life and Development in its entirety, the Student Representative Council, my colleagues at the Madibaz Youth Lab, NMMU students, as well as the rest of the community that's online, that's also present here. Just a few ground rules. We do have a hashtag. If you see on your program, it's at the third last line. It is my Imbadu series. And also, the bathroom arrangement is in this manner. Males must utilize Claude Cavane residence, and then females must utilize the Sarah Batman residence. Today we're gathered here for one of 4 dialogue series under the name of Imbadu series, which seeks to better deal with critical issues that face youth in developing youth to a better society and trying to create change agents. Mine is to facilitate. I can speak forever, but because of time, I'm going to keep it short. But this day is very significant in that we celebrate Freedom Day, and it's under the theme of leadership and activism in modern society. So as we discuss and reflect, we ought to think about what does it mean on Freedom Day for leadership and activism. I would like to call upon, and also just a brief technicality, because I see on the program, we will, in the message of support, just a brief of an adjustment there. We'll have the Student Representative Council, and then followed by the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack. My colleague, Ayanda, is going to do the welcoming, but I'm not seeing her in the room as of yet. But I think I will take it because I think I'm more than capable of doing it. Welcome, everyone, to this, as I said, one of 4 Imbadu series. So, in Imbadu, I think the Dean will touch upon it much more in detail. I don't mean to task you, Dean, but I think you are much more capacitated in that manner. It's a place where, if I can explain it closer, where things of the family can be discussed in openness, in a free space where people can discuss their issues and their problems and come up with solutions. So in the essence of using it within this Imbadu series of the Madibaz youth, we're aiming to look at developing change agents in society, and the best way to start that is to start it off within our own university. Because the Madibaz Youth Lab seeks to be an engine that is a catalyst in ensuring that we change the society, that we are to be the change that we want to see in society through young people. Nothing for young people without them. So with those few words, I want to welcome you and say, Kulani Paji, I will now move on to the next item on the program. I would like to invite the SRC-SG Sitembezile Mpatsa to share a few words of message of support, not more than 4 to 5 minutes from the SRC. Thank you very much. If you come through.
Sanmonan, firstly, my name is Sinetezekile Banza. You might have butchered it a bit there. Yeah, so my name is Netezekile Mbanza, and I serve as the Secretary General of the SLC at Nelson Mandela University. I would like to greet the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack. I'd like to greet the Senior Manager, Sylvester Tswane. I'd like to greet the Director of SGD, Dr. Bernard Sibake. And I'd like to greet the President of the SLC in his absentia, Mr. Ponzo Hlongwane. I'd like to greet the TG of the SLC, Khuma Utlevukubi, and our Academic Officer, Bayitsi Mahlangu. We are really grateful. Oh, and I'd also like to greet the facilitator and the panelist for today's conversation. We're really grateful for the invite, and we're happy that we have honored it. And we, as the SRC, would like to say that we are happy to see that there are spaces where students can come together and engage and be in conversation, especially about leadership and activism, especially in the institution of higher learning, because this is where we are supposed to be fighting historical debts, GBV, racism, and all of those things. So we are really grateful to see that we can come together and converse. Also, I'd just like to say that may this conversation also inspire us, especially women in this institution. May we trace our steps in the life of Umamu Madibaz Mandela. May we see her life as an inspiration, and for us to engage in these conversations, ask questions, and participate in the economy of our country, because I feel like in most cases women are sort of shut down in this conversation. So I'm very happy to see that we have a female representative amongst the panelists. So it means that our issues can be discussed and we can come out with solutions. So with that, we'd like to say thank you and welcome, and may you guys have a very productive conversation. Thank you.
I apologize as well. It was not intentional. Hopefully I don't get butchered or get attacked. Without wasting any time, the custodian in terms of systems is the dean of students. I like to call Mr. Lutando Jack. Dean.
Ngosi, Buntu, you say you forgot, you mispronounced the name of SG. Now I almost forgot your own name. Yeah. I almost said good morning, I'm not going to be long because I'm not well, I'm not feeling well, but I thought that let me come to this event because I had promised to come. So if I was well, because I think the SG took 3 minutes, I was going to take the 2 minutes she did not take, and then take my 10 minutes and make it 12 minutes. But I'm not going to do that. All protocol observed. Buntu, part of what I want us to do is when we greet, there is a tendency of entrenching, and this is part of our miseducation, of entrenching hierarchies in how we greet, and then greet and embed some kind of a sense of importance. Say, I greet Dean of Students. You see what the SG was doing, senior manager, director, and then students. Part of the miseducation, part of our miseducation is, there's a friend of mine who passed on from Mtata, Vuyo Matozoma, may his soul rest in peace. He used to make this example when we were in the trade union movement together. By the way, Happy Freedom Day. He used to make this example about graduation ceremonies. and he used to speak isiXhosa and say, you know, when there's a graduation ceremony, there are those who are on academic regalia and those who are not on academic regalia. And then you'll hear people saying, when the procession comes into the hall, "Sukelana bantu, sukelana bantu." And then he says, but it's as if nina ningo bantu. So part of what we really have to dialogue about is ways of relating. Ways of relating, and ways of relating are informed by ways of knowing and ways of being. How do you know? You know, as who? So those are some of the things that we really need to revisit. So greetings, all of you, ngokulingana kwenu. So that's how we're supposed to greet, because before I am a dean of student, I am a human being, and before you are a student, you are a human being. So we are all human beings, and our interactions ought to be just like that. We interact as human beings, but who are given by society different responsibilities at a particular point in time. And I remember this very well because after finishing my first qualification many years ago, I'm sure some of you were not even born by then, what happened, I was employed by the very same institution, the erstwhile Eastern Cape Technikon. Then my lecturers, my former lecturers, my former managers became my colleagues. And they treated me like one of them. So that's how life is. So which then takes me to what Ubuntu asked me to do. Why Imbadu? Now, back then, families and communities used to gather, and when they gather, to share knowledge, they used to say, "Masityeni Imbadu." That was the theme, or not the theme, that was the name of their conversations, what we now call dialogues. Masihlaleni sitye Imbadu. Informally, generational as well as intergenerational, and exchange views, discuss, dialogue about topical issues of the day. But sitya Imbadu. Now, because of colonialism and miseducation, such rich African ways of knowing, sharing information, we don't use those terms. We're calling it a dialogue. We even call it, because I understand, we can even call it Imbadu dialogue, and yet Imbadu is a dialogue. Do you get what I'm saying? I was saying, I was in Queenstown yesterday, was invited by the mayor there to talk about the life and times of Chrisan. Now, for instance, our government talks about the social compact. We also talk about that. I've written something about it for the higher education. But when you look at the social compact, it's about ilim. That let's work together to solve this particular problem that is confronting us. Ilim. Now, if we converse in ways that are complex, that are not simple, that are easily understood by people, our message is not going to come across. Our message is not going to come across. And yet, if you're saying Imbadu, of course, those of you, most of you, you are young. I'm sure even your families don't use that term. So we've got to be curious and ask ourselves, what is Imbadu? You know, Ilima. Back then, when the going gets tough, a particular family would call Ilima, invite people in the village to say, we would want to do this work, but we need support. Sicela Ilima, which is now called a social compact. But why are we calling it a social compact instead of calling it Ilima? So this dialogue series is part of reclaiming our identity as Africans, reclaiming Ubuntu betu as Abantu. So that's basically the essence. So I hope that, without of course prescribing anything to our panelists, so I therefore hope that the theme, leadership and activism in a modern society, I hope that they are going to help us define leadership and activism in today's times. And I also hope that they are going to be able to conceptualize a modern society. But we are an African university, so I would be interested to hear what it is that they are going to say in defining a modern society in an African context. But I'm not trying to problematize whatever notes they might have generated. Otherwise, thank you so much, and thanks and all the best. And I'm happy to be here. But as I said, I don't feel so well, so I'll just sit there and keep quiet. But if my health deteriorates, I will disappear. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dean. After that, I can't say nothing. It's time to move to the main course, the foods of the day. I will now hand over to my colleague and friend, if I can call him a friend, I don't know, Yonela Mashalaba, who will be facilitating the Imbadu session, the Imbadu session, and Moshank, almost said Imbadu dialogue session. So mine with you is over for now. Yonela will call upon his panelists, and they will join him. He will unpack how things are going to go. I'm going to go over that side. We can switch off this mic, if it's fine.
Good afternoon, Nelson Mandela University. Ndiyanibulisa emveni kwemini. Igama lam njengoba Ubuntu has already articulated, nguYonela Mashalaba. Ndingunyana wentombi yaMandlovu oNgcobo oGengezi. Siphuma kwezinye ilali zakuTsolo, on what you used to call the former Transkei. I'd like to take this opportunity again to welcome you to the Madibaz Youth Lab and the first Imbadu series. I also want to take this opportunity to depart from what the Dean has said, Ubasia Lingana Sonke. I actually think the student is actually the most important stakeholder of the university. So Ndibulisa Nenakala, and Ndibulisa the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack, and Bulise Dr. Subake, and all the res managers and representatives ngokulingana ke ngoku. Nelson Mandela University is recognized all over the globe for its youth leadership capacity and its potential. that is said on fact. The university encourages critical scholarship and the expression of multiplicity of opinions and ideas. And I think Imbadu series is actually born out of that logic. Andifuni ke uqhuba kakhulu ngoba the space is not exactly mine. My job today is just to facilitate, kubamba nje ixesha, nokunika imic abantu, nothing more than that. I'm gonna bring up our panelists, and then after that, the panelists will basically engage in whatever fruit that they have for us today. And then after that, we will open a session for a Q&A, a question and answer session. And ndiyayazi uba sinenkokheli who would want to engage, because the manner in which dialogues should be held, in fact, is not from a point of knowledge of tower where the panelists are actually pouring knowledge on you guys, but rather an engagement, a collective engagement. So that I'm hoping that's exactly what we're going to have. Without wasting any further time, I'd like to call on our panelists, Wandisile Sebezo, who would be our first speaker, but ngicela nize nonke at the same time nosesethu Gomo Seyibhokwe no Asemahle Kwala. Ngicela nibanike izandla. So the topic today, I'm sure Uba, you guys have seen it on your seats, on the pamphlets. The panelists are going to be discussing leadership, activism in modern society, and as Mr. Lutando Jack, our Dean of Student, has already alluded to it, Uba, it's going to be in the context of a modern society, and it will be interesting to actually see how our panelists are going to capture the frame of the modern society. I had a mind of my own, as much as the Dean did not want to frame this, to say this. This is how an African modern society would be. But I'm tempted to impose certain things to the panelists, particularly with what has been happening in our country in the recent times, where we've seen an emergence of social activists that have been bringing up very controversial topics, to some where those topics are seen in other corners as xenophobic, being led by young people in our societies. And as well, with what is happening globally and in Ukraine, to how we actually articulate the science that is happening. We're seeing unmanned war vehicles that are being operated, and how ethical are those, in terms of the war itself, because leadership is seen everywhere. It's not just seen in times of peace, but during war times as well, you need leadership. So mandiyaku chita ixesha, mandi Wandisile Sebezo, uba azosiqalela this topic. Each and every one of you have a mic next to you. What you will do is switch on the mic when you are about to speak, and then just give it 3 seconds. There's a 3-second time delay, and then you can start speaking, and then you just switch off the mic and just allow the next speaker to speak. Thank you very much. Wansile.
Thanks, Mashalaba. I'm actually old school. I'm young, but I'm old school, so I wrote a speech. I don't know in this era of social media whether it's appropriate. But I agree with the Dean that all animals are equal. Safe to say, the Dean of Students. the SRC leadership, and the broader university community, especially students. As introduced, my name is Wandisile Africa Sabezo, and I'm from a small town called Plattenberg Bay in the Western Cape. It's the first time when we enter the Western Cape from the Eastern Cape. I'm glad to be back in Gqeberha. I was here last week for a graduation. My sister was graduating in education. And today I'm here addressing the first of Imbadu series. Okay, so I'm directed to sit down. Thanks. Apologies. Before we begin, I think it's only polite if I tell you who I am or where I come from. All my life, I've considered myself as a member of the left, a socialist, so to speak. So in everything that I do, I approach it from that vantage point. You guys will forgive me. This, of course, means I believe in humanity, the advocacy of human rights, free speech, access to free education and healthcare. And of course, I hate with passion conformity. I'm not a fan of political correctness. I don't think it's useful. I'm not a fan of the cancel culture. I don't think it's effective. I know to be an activist these days means canceling people we disagree with on Twitter, shouting down those who have a different view from our own. I think this kind of activism won't take us anywhere. It's a safer option as opposed to confronting and tackling issues head on. Recently, I watched with interest the JSC interviews for the position of Chief Justice. One of the commissioners there, Advocate Mandela, asked Judge Dustin Mlambo, I think a pertinent question, that whether the JP has participated in the struggle against apartheid. Mlambo answers by saying no, which then prompts Advocate Mandela to a follow-up question, that how can you preside, therefore, and be a vanguard of a constitution you never fought for? Many people saw that as an attack on Mlambo, but I disagree with that view. You know, I think it's a good question because the key to leadership and activism is one's character. If your character is questionable, you cannot lead us. If you are neutral when injustice occurs, clearly you're not fit to lead. That a law student in the apartheid days, such as Dustin Mlambo, decides not to participate in the struggle against apartheid, both will assume that once you're a law student, you know what's right and what's wrong. You can tell what's humane and what's not humane, but then decides not to participate. That's a questionable character. And I think it's such leaders, or it's such leadership that do not deserve the attention of a growing South Africa, of a growing economy like South Africa. When COVID struck in March 2020, in my hometown, a group of young people, after seeing many people losing their jobs due to the harsh lockdown imposed by the government, they started an initiative called Plat Food Fund. It's about a group of 9 young people. And they started collecting monies from as little as 50 rands. And those donations were raised to help more than 70 families. And the money that was raised was up to 40,000 rands in a space of 5 weeks. 50 rands there, 200 there. That's the kind of activism I'm talking about. Activism that is based on improving the society we live in. I do not think we'll be able to address economic issues if we can't deal with this first. The issue of selfless leadership. We need selfless leadership to realize our full potential. But I don't know, maybe I'm being too idealistic and being too ambitious. Of course, this is besides our education system producing graduates that will struggle to be absorbed by the economy, Dean. Because there seems to be a conflict. The shop floor situation doesn't absorb, the outputs, the products of higher education in this country. And I think this is where this is our point of departure, that why are we having too many unemployed graduates? And why is higher education in South Africa not in sync with the needs of the economy? But also, We need to call on the private sector to play a more role in the development of the Republic. Currently, private capital in South Africa arrogantly stands on the sidelines and watch government carry the burden. But in the meantime, they milk in millions and millions in profit while paying our people the bare minimum. For a developing economy such as South Africa, we need a patriotic private sector. Fortunately or unfortunately, South Africa's #1 civil servant, the president, seems to be enjoying the confidence of this group. But so far, in my view, I think he has failed to exploit his proximity to capital for the greater good of the country. On the policy front, I think radical policy shifts at the macro level are needed if you are to address the huge unemployment rate in the country. With unemployment sitting at just over 35% in the fourth quarter of 2021, why are we still exporting our minerals without value? And they come back to us as finished products. But what's happening currently, especially in the mining industry, we dig up our minerals, then they're sent to Germany. So they go create jobs elsewhere, instead of creating jobs locally by being processed by local manufacturers. But I think that alone will strengthen our manufacturing base, but we are not doing so. Our macroeconomic policies seem to be not in sync. And this, I argue that is not correct. Our economic policies at a macro level are not pro-poor. They are market-friendly. And to be controversial, I know Bondo will laugh at this, I blame Thabo Mbeki for this. So it is my hypothesis that we need to move away from being a service-based economy to a more manufacturing one. Besides, South Africa is a fairly industrial country. I don't know why everyone wants a laptop and a corner office these days. We're an industrial country, and we need to behave as such. We also need to decentralize the economy. Too much is focused on urban cities such as Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town. We need to empower smaller towns, establish, industrial zones. There's no reason why, besides infrastructure issues, rural towns cannot be IDZs. There's no reason. Here in the Eastern Cape alone, Imbadu was one such a town. Why can't Ingobo, where I come from, be that town? But here's another problem we're facing as a country. We have a crisis as far as the leadership of the country is concerned. The national leadership, in my view, is out of touch with reality. We are led by a generation rightfully fought against apartheid. We admire that. But have now since been co-opted to being defenders and promoters of capital at the expense of the people. We have a Tito Mboweni, for example, who tweets day in and day out. When he's not part of the cabinet, he says the right things, very progressive, even promotes the state bank. But as soon as he's out of cabinet, but as soon as he's in cabinet, Tito Mboweni pleases the ruling class. You have a plain Zimande. You guys, I believe, are his constituents, who purports to be a socialist, but fails to influence government policy to be in power with socialist ideals of free and decommodified higher education, for example. That the average age of a cabinet member or member of parliament is 60 years and above should be a cause for concern. How will the 60-year-old minister understand issues faced by young people in a post-apartheid South Africa? That person won't be able to do it. But also as young people, we are not free from blame ourselves. Because the situation won't change for as long as young people have voter apathy, do not take part in decision-making processes because we think we are too cool to be involved in politics. Because the reality is that outside of university campuses, young people do not care. They're getting on with their lives while the elders are making decisions about their lives and their future without them. This should worry us as young people to celebrate democracy 28 years since the first vote. These are the questions we need to deal with as the youth of the country. I worked as a writer and a public relations officer for a PR company back home called Black Tourism. My job was to promote the town as the most preferred tourist destination. But I always get frustrated because It's too white. It's too white, but black people are there. They run the show, they're servicemen and women, but they do not control that economy. But I think the tourism can be one of those industries that young people can play a role in driving the economy of the country. Because I do not believe that tourists come to South Africa for only safari and pristine beaches that we have. We've got something far more greater to offer besides those. That is our culture and heritage, especially in provinces such as the Eastern Cape. This province is rich in culture, it's rich in heritage, and there is a market for that in the tourism sector, but we're not exploiting it. KZN, I think, seems to be doing well in that industry. The Gauteng province has tabled the Gauteng Township Economy Bill, which some of us will watch with keen interest its progress. It's a good move, and we hope that those of us who work in the tourism space, if Gauteng wins, we will all win. But if Gauteng fails at the implementation stage, then we must kiss township tourism, cultural exchange programs goodbye. Because that bill should be as a pilot. Currently, I'm working as a local economic development for the municipality, and tourism is one of my portfolios. So I'm very much interested to see how they do so that we can also try to influence the government that side. Of course, it's the Western Cape, so it's going to be difficult. But we have to try. Africa is said to be the young continent, population age-wise. Many young people are found in Africa today. So the onus is on us as young people, as this generation, to, as Frans Fanon says, discover our mission, fulfill it or betray it. The question often asked is, do young people have the agency? Well, the answer depends from which vantage point one looks at the situation. But I'm not a pessimist. As James Baldwin once said, I cannot be a pessimist, but I'm still alive. We can't tell the children there's no hope. So we need to soldier on. And I think we do have the agency. If the roads must fall and fees must fall movements are anything to go by, those movements showed us that young people, we are the ones we've been waiting for. That this of course entails confronting and speaking truth to power all the time. For the long run though, activism and leadership from young people will entail compromising our individual selfish interest for the greater good. For history teaches us, united we stand, but divided we fall. And as black people, we ought to know better. Let me leave you with a quotation from Thomas Sankara in A Bright Man. We must choose either champagne for the few or clean drinking water for all. Thanks.
I want to thank Mr. Wandisile for that delivery. He has touched on a few issues that perhaps you'd like to put in mind for later engagement. Wandisile has touched on the issue of character when it comes to leadership, stating that one should be able to confront issues head on. I want to add on that when I want to say that as much as it is important for leadership to be able to confront issues head on, another important part is perhaps restraint. I watched dealing with a delegate of ESCOM where he gave the delegate an ultimatum to either stay or leave. And I questioned that type of leadership, because I felt that an opportunity was missed there let me say, I think maybe perhaps restraint also is particular another character that one should be looking into. You also touch on public education, not in sync with the economy, the private and public partnership not being exploited for the greater good of the country, the move, the country to perhaps move from service-based to manufacturing. He also alluded to the fact that the national leadership is out of touch with the people. And I also want to be controversial there as well and say, in fact, young leaders are themselves out of touch with their own issues, because what I've experienced in the past years as part of students and student leadership is that students are very, very excited with being in proximity with leadership instead of taking the risk of being leaders themselves and have diverging views. So I want to challenge everyone here, in fact, to take the risk of being or exploiting the capacity, their own capacity of leading. Our next panelist is seemingly not here for a few seconds. I will let Asemahle go in this instance. Thank you.
Thanks, Mesh. Greetings to each and everyone. Has already been alluded that there are no hierarchies in such a space. And I feel that is very, very much important. As much as we might take this gathering as regular in such a space, but it's actually a very good environment for us to exchange ideas. 25 years ago, or back in the day, especially during the apartheid and the height of the apartheid system, it was not common for black people to actually come and converge in such a space and share these radical ideas, and especially about pertinent issues such as economic relations. Because as we all know, the world is simply organized. I think I need to simplify this. The world is simply organized between the core countries and also the periphery countries. And if you look at the core countries, are usually the colonies. You have your Great Britain, your Belgium, all these what you call developed countries. And then you have the periphery countries, which predominantly they lie in the southern line divide in terms of the world map. So those relations are not fair because you have these big countries who are using their might in terms of economic power and military power to impose on themselves, on the smaller countries. So as citizens of a country such as South Africa, we, as much as we might allude and espouse great leadership capabilities, but also there must be that historical understanding and activism that drives our interactions. So that's why I had prepared, you can see that I wrote about 5 pages. I'm kidding. I had prepared to speak on a lot of issues, but I was touched by a lot of areas, especially on economic modeling and the crisis that you currently have in terms of not knowing whether we're going or we're not moving at all. So I think what is important is that, for example, let me make a very simple example because I think all of us need to understand this thing in terms of the day-to-day things that we interact with. For example, in South Africa, it's a given that there's a huge market for cars. If you are driving between here and maybe Boardwalk, you are going to come across more than 100 cars. And if you look at those 100 cars, how many cars are produced in South Africa? Out of those 100 cars, it's 0. And it's not because you don't have the capabilities to produce cars. For example, we have companies such as Denel. For the long time, they were leading in the aerospace. They used to produce aeroplanes. They used to produce big machineries, the R5s, all these big military weapons. So we can actually produce a simple standard car. But then it comes to the world economic relations that South Africa, because of the fact that we're still dependent on the IMF for loans, our debt to GDP ratio is growing on a daily basis. We're still dependent on the World Bank. So that means now we must forge relations with Western countries. And by forging relations with Western countries, we're basically saying they must come and trade within our borders. So I think that's what we must do, more than our Africans who are in our communities. But it's the economic relations. For example, if I decide to do a startup, for example, let me just say I'm producing shoes. the shoe that I'll produce is going to be far much more expensive in terms of overhead costs than a shoe that is produced in the US, because the US has this big market, so they have advantage in terms of economies of scale. They also have advantage because those big corporates, they are given subsidies, they are given tax breaks, so that ultimately goes down to the price. So the government and especially political leadership must not be afraid to deal with those issues. And if we're honest, between me and you, they will not deal with those issues. Because as previously stated, the average age of a person that is a parliamentarian in South Africa is appalling. So they have no interest in the future. And even in terms of how much they earn a lot of money, so that even the generation beyond them is well taken care of. So it's up to us as people in this room, as much as you might think that we are not parliamentarians, we are not people that are in political parties, but for leadership to be heralded forward, it must come from the ground. And there's no better person than us, we as young people in this room. If you look at all the major epochs in the world, you can go back from the Cuban Revolution in the 1950s and so on and so forth. And the 80s as well, when we had the young lions, the special generation of young lions. And also much more recently, when we spoke about radical economic shift in terms of the current status quo, it was the 2012 Gallagher Estate generation of the Youth League that coined the term economic freedom in our lifetime. So it's always young people and it's always us. That's why even here in these universities, they are very particular on the curriculum that they teach us. For example, I read somewhere that Pico is still not yet recognized as a philosopher. So in certain confines of curriculum formulation, such literature is deemed as radical, is not part of the mainstream course intake that is being conveyed to students in our classrooms. And that is not by accident, it's by design, so that you don't have these radical ideas to think about these issues. What you must do is that you must work here at the university, you must study here at the university, and ultimately you graduate, and then you join the conveyor belt of labor. So you see yourself not as a person that can create employment with the skills that you have learned here at the university, but you see yourself as a person that is a cog in a much bigger machinery that is not working on your own welfare as a young person. So these conversations of Imbadu are very important because we are here together. We are from the same level, all of us. No one is above anyone else. Anyone else can speak about anything that they want to speak about. So we have an exchange of ideas, which is a very dangerous process, and because it's one of the major mechanisms to curtail youth development, because if you don't think, then your action will not be informed. So that's why we're having these dialogues, and that's why these dialogues are very much important. Hey, I have 15 minutes. Okay, so another issue that another issue which I want to touch on, which is very much important, I think it's also a debate that we had during the youth convention last year around the township economy. So I'm very happy that the previous speaker touched on it, because it's very important, especially looking at what is currently happening in our townships today, the violence that is happening because of sporadic movements that have rose. For the mere fact that it's called a township economy unsettles me, because an economy is an economy, regardless of where it's situated. So what is happening now is that even what they deem as township economy, but it has actually now regressed because now we have big corporates who have now entered the township market. One of the reasons why the apartheid system was not sustainable, it was because the apartheid elite, which consisted of your Anglo-American, your DPS, all these big conglomerates that were channeling the apartheid machinery. One of the reasons why they had to stop and why apartheid collapsed, outside of the fact that there was activism that was happening in the townships were basically burning on a daily basis. But it's also the economic question because they had reached a ceiling whereby they grew and grew and grew, but now there was a point whereby they reached a cul-de-sac. So for those companies to grow on the stock market, they had to attract a new, different segment of the population. So South Africa had to now have a very strong middle class so that it can be able to sustain this growth of these big companies. So what is happening is that now they saw that no, they've built enough malls in a lot of urban areas around the country. So now they had to go to the township and replicate the same model. And in replicating the same model, it means that it affects the person that is on the ground in terms of how they sell, because scientifically, it becomes very difficult to compete with a big distributor if your units are much lesser. So it's a very important issue that we also need to touch on. And it's very broad as well, because it's not as simplistic as one would think it is, of just empowering black businesses and giving them funding, but it goes beyond making sure that that terrain is protected as well. That's why when you sell something to China, for example, they impose huge tariffs so that good that you are selling is not competitive in their market. So there are a lot of those economic discrepancies, but at the heart of it is because we don't have a leadership base that is willing to take the risk of losing their immediate comfort for the greater good. So I think that's one of the issues that we need to grapple with. And also, I would like to just briefly touch on, the importance of a radical policy shift. Because, for example, unemployment is at a level high in the country. So whatever is happening in terms of economic policy formulation is not what is supposed to be for a South African in a modern society. So there are a lot of those issues, but I don't want to delve on them too much because we still have other panelists. And then if there's anything that arises, I'm sure we can continue with this conversation, but thanks.
Thank you very much, Asemahle. Just to remind you that we are live on YouTube, and our current trending hashtags are MyIndaba, YL Indaba series, YL Indaba, Imbadu series. Bekuchiwo kwathiwa we're gonna say dialogue Imbadu. Asemahle has touched on many issues. One of them being the manner in which South African economy or manufacturers are always placed in a position where they have to partner up with foreign countries whenever they need to manufacture. So that basically speaks to our ability to manufacture independently in the country. Also spoke on or alluded to the curriculum decolonization, if I heard him correctly there. where he was articulating that, in fact, there are some scholars that are not seen in our curriculum because they are seen to be radical, and also touch on the ability of black businesses, SMMEs and so on, to compete with conglomerates and international markets. I think from what you've actually touched on, and in particular the issue of curriculum decolonization, is the importance, Wenadine, of the outputs of such dialogues to be able to influence policy of the institution. And I know that this university is very capable of that, because at some point it once took a stance to say that it is student-centered. And within that, they actually implemented that by changing teaching and learning to learning and teaching, because they were of the idea that they are actually student first and then everything else to follow. So it is important that the outcomes of such a series not end up in files and so on. I'll also take that opportunity for myself to just say on all social media pages, Ndinguyonela Mashalaba, and then on TikTok, Uyonela Mashalaba 58. What's it? You are next. That's it.
All right, good afternoon, Molweni, Ninjan. I'm very well, thank you. My name is Sesetu Komo Seipokwe. I'm the founder of Sesetu Komo Communications, and I would like to consider myself as an active citizen. I'm not really a politically, speaky kind of person, so I don't have those big, as a terms, I guess is the infrastructure. I don't know any of that. So mine is to basically give a very practical and more implementation in terms of what is youth and democracy in terms of strengthening opportunities. And I'll be sharing my lived experience of being a student at the university, being an employee at the university, and now coming back, as a panelist, I guess, to the university. So I graduated here in 2011 in my BA Media and Communications. I then went on to do my honors, and it was roughly just before the Fees Must Fall protests. So Mr. Mashalaba is laughing because he was very, very, very instrumental in the Fees Must Fall campaign, and I was good friends with a Mr. Olwam Mwazi, who's the founder of Black Hat, and our dream was to get, once we graduate, to get an internship in Nelson Mandela University, so many permanent post in MU, and then can go work here until we die. So, and we were happy with that, that was the end goal. I was going to take over a marketing department, now Uzoyo take over Mrs. Zin. And that was the plan. And then we were kind of introduced to a non-partisan organization called Inkulu Free Hate, which stood for Inkululeko Freedom Free Hate. It was an initiative that was started in Cape Town by Usizwe Mpofu Walsh and Frederick de Reda. And they said, look, we want to have a non-partisan approach in terms of tackling societal issues, because we find that when we tackle things from a left wing, others become tone deaf, and then when we tackle certain issues from the right wing, others become tone deaf. So if we come together as a non-partisan organization and say we do not represent the people in green, the blue band, the red, being a red band at the time, and all kinds of others, and come in a non-partisan, saying, no, we're not going to come with those things. We are just going to come as young people wanting to change society. So that is where Inkulu Free Hate started, and man, what a movement we had. We have seen the growth and the development of young people in South Africa coming together, where we put together dialogues with your leading politicians, your Vusi Pekolis, and saying, no, guys, we'll have all different types of people come together, share their different views, share their different opinions under the auspices of deepening the sense of democracy, uplifting social cohesion, and saying, no, we don't want people to look at us from they are young, they're immature, they don't know what they are doing, but to say, what is it that you as young people want? Because we are here for you. We want to understand what your plight is, what it is that you want in order to effect change within South Africa. And then obviously, most importantly, active citizenry as a woman. You know, the importance that the role that women play in active citizenry and ensuring that things get done. You know, we used to find in the meetings that, no offense to the gents, but they would have dialogues for like 3.5 hours. And then we'd say, okay, cool, but then what is the plan of action? What is the next step? Ayikho. I'm like, hayi bo. Sijube 3.5 hours yonke sathetha ngento sathetha nge-Marxism, ne-Calcism, all these isms. Kanti there's no plan of action. So having women saying, okay, cool, okay, we hear you, thank you. Can we draw up a 10-step plan of action? Let us host a community in Daba. So what we did in that era, there were soap boxes. Literally what a soap box was, something that that was made of pellets, right? And there were 3 that were stacked, and we were here in what was then known as Melody Zanadu. And we invited people to say, guys, sizobane soapbox apa sifuna uva nina bananithini as abantu base NMMU. What are your concerns and what are your plights as a student, as a black student in the Nelson Mandela University? And we want to write them down and then take them up with the powers that be. So we did that. We had a successful series of them and took them up to the powers of be. So we know that there's all the red tape, and we'll get to it. It will be at the next council meeting, and yawn fest. So we took the decision and we put it in our own hands. We said, okay, how do we implement these changes as Funwayo by young people? Because we have the capacity. We have the power, we have the strength. We might not have the financial resources, but we've got the fire to navigate things. And one thing I can tell you about being an active member in society is that it doesn't take a lot. You might think, no, I have to be, an executive in a certain place. I have to be this. I have to have this amount of money. I have to be able to have transport. I mean, if we told you how we put together these events, 0 rand budget, getting sponsors, getting sandwiches from Spa, knocking on the doors of, at the time, your CANRADs, your DVC's office, or in fact, anyone who was willing to listen to us. We would knock on their door and say, Sine Soapbox, and we need you here. And what that does is it opens up things in you that you didn't even realize that you had. You know, instead of sitting on social media and scrolling and looking at what's happening and what's trending, we used our social media platforms to activate change and say, we're going to share this. Please like, share with your people, with your friends, tag institutions, and let's get this movement going. So the top 3 things that I would like to share is the top 3 takeaways in active citizenship, or how we create an active citizenry amongst the youth in the 21st century, knowing that the fight of 1976 was their own fight, right? We have our own fight. And we, first and foremost as women, have to cement ourselves. If no one offers you a chair at the table, you take your camp chair and you sit there. And you take a PhD student going out there and making those strides as a young person. And not necessarily fighting the way we fought in 1976, but we now fight here at the tip of our tongues and at the tip of our fingertips. Understanding that we have to be intentional about creating the change. If we wait on other people to want to create the change on our behalf, we're going to lose. And understanding that when you open yourself up to such opportunities, you get so much exposure. So, for example, Usine Tegezile, she does my social media for a series of my events that I host in my business. And because she was just such a vivacious character that was consistently putting herself out there, I noticed her and I said, yo, this girl is good. I need to get her in my team ASAP. So being a young person, being innovative and putting yourself out there is the best thing you could actually do for yourself. And then play to your strengths. Playing to your strengths is something that is so, so important. We're not all going to be standing on top of the mountaintop and, you know, saying all these things. Maybe my strength is administration. I'm a great administrator. I know how to put things together. Maybe my strength is report writing because we need to find out, research things, and have coherent proposals when we put them out to other stakeholders. Whatever your strength is, play towards that strength. And then the top 3 takeaways are innovation. You know, being broke creates so much creativity. When you don't have money, you get so creative, you know. You find so many ways of making things happen that had you had money, you wouldn't have thought about it, right? Hey, okanye xa userez ushekele ipapa mhlawumbi ne-red pepper eyi-1 ne-aromat come hey I wonder man bandino kungaphuma ntoni apha. And then from that moment, you actually come out with one of the most fantastic recipes you've ever tasted because you were innovated. You worked with what you have. One of my mentors always says, work with what you have, take where you are, and make the best of it. Don't wait until this comes or that resource comes or someone says yes. And sometimes don't even wait for people to say yes. Just do it and then, oh, okay, sorry. And then secondly, integrity. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is watching. You know, having integrity in this space of acting citizenry speaks volumes for you because your name will precede you in rooms that you haven't even entered into. If I speak about Yonela Mashalaba, then we know, yo, this guy, was he president at one stage, ne? Of Zanadu. Hi guys, yena mntu omkhulu. So I don't want to humble. You know, if you wanna, you know, if you want to find out, you know, all these great people, their names precede them in places that they haven't entered. And why? It's because of the works that they do. So when you have integrity and do the right thing when no one is watching, you'll find that you establish such a great social capital for yourself that by the time you enter into that room, by the time you're invited, by the time you send that email.
Yes, I'm just saying that you should give her the second round of applause because apparently I was president at some point. Allegedly. But thank you so much. This is my good friend, Usesetu. That's not the reason why she's here, though. But I've known this lady for quite some time. Very respectable person. And I'm sure as the younger generation coming after her, she had a lot of lessons. Particularly Andy Tandileyo is the one where she was speaking about the implementation of change and finding creative ways, in fact, to implement change and to be intentional with the change that you want to create in society. And one of the things, when you are intentional with the change that you want to make, you visualize the outcome first. I think that's just my opinion. I think you have to visualize outcome of the change that you need to make so that before you make a noise, are you going to be able to stick to the process of the change that you think should be implemented? because the change that you want is not going to be implemented by anyone else. Gone are the days of struggle heroes that die and leave us to continue with their fights. It's up to you. If you see change and you want to implement change, it's up to you. When you leave, if you leave any space before the change is made, izawuhlala injalo, ne? We don't have struggle heroes anymore. And also she spoke on integrity, doing the right thing when no one is watching. I think that is very important, and I think that is why I needed to make sure that everyone knows that I've never been president for the sake of my integrity, but I appreciate the lens and under which you view me. And she also spoke on tackling society issues, well, actually, when she started, which I think is actually sometimes very important, being able to tackle issues from a non-partisan point of view. I think sometimes that allows you a certain level of objectivity when you're dealing with issues. So I think as much as I think it's one of possibly, I'd say, one of the most difficult approaches, because when you don't have many people behind you, it becomes very difficult for you to be heard in society. But like I said earlier on, as young leaders, I encourage people to take the risk of just standing apart from everyone else, because what that does, even though you might be not popular when that happens, but if you stand outside of the collective sometimes and with integrity, it will leave a lasting legacy. People will remember the integrity that you stood, even if you are not popular at that time. I think the dean can agree to that. Let me move on to the question and answer session. I think we are just 5 minutes before the time of which we were supposed to end. So I want to applaud our listeners, our panelists, with the timekeeping there. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a revolving mic. Okay, so there's going to be a revolving mic, and as well you can ask questions on YouTube. The people that are watching via our streams, you can just log a question there on the commentary session, and someone will be able to pick it up, and those questions will be brought to my table. I would start by first giving, let's start with 5 hands, I think. 5 hands if you want to pose any particular question to the panelists that are sitting here. Number 1, 2, 3, 4. Last hand for the first round. 5. Okay. In that order, Ingapi revolving mic. That's our number 1 there.
Greetings to the house at large. My name is Baiti Mahlangu. So I don't have a question, I rather have a contribution, hey? And it's quite lengthy, so please tell me to slow down if needs be. The most fundamental quagmire in relation to the question of leadership and activism in the modern society is neoliberalism, masked as the so-called rainbow nation. This challenge persists because of the other challenge of ethical African leadership. The reality of this matter is that post-apartheid, so-called democratic dispensation has been nothing but a violent, anti-black fallacy manifesting itself through politics of falsehood. Beyond the falsehood paraded by the neoliberal power structure and its black political elite stooges, black people remain poor and landless. Because of exclusion from the social, economic, political, and cultural, black people, especially the youth, remains entangled in drugs, crime, excessive unsafe sex, and all sorts of lumpen activities. But this reality is difficult to unmask because of the phenomenon Karl Marx correctly observed, that the dominant ideas of any society are the ideas of the ruling class, bourgeoisie propaganda, which has become common sense of society, which makes it difficult to unmask these realities. Making the situation more depressing is the fact that there is an absence of ethical leadership and is not captured by power structures and does not desire lavish lifestyles at the expense of the oppressed and exploited black majority. These, according to me, are the two fundamental questions leadership and activism have to battle with in modern South Africa in order to wage a productive fight against anti-black racism, capitalism, sexism, homophobia, all of which are core principles of the imperialist machinery. Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. Number 2, I think.
To the House at large. Thank you, Mr. Mashalaba. I have a question pointing to Ms. Sesetu Gomo. I'm sorry. I wish to know, do we have these societies here at the campus? Because ever since the environment started to go remotely, it has been difficult for most students to go social, like attending these kinds of events. And what I've noticed and find that we really need these kinds of socials where we can gather and learn and also share about these kinds of information. So I wish to know how can we find or get to be involved in these societies, especially the ones you mentioned, the active citizens for women, and also the community Indaba societies. Yeah.
Igama,
Sandy.
you can move the mic to the third person.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me just say all protocol observed. Mine is it's a bit of a lengthy question. So it's addressed to Mr. Wandisile. My name is Ndomelele, my surname is Chisa. To you, Mr. Wandisile. So you spoke about how to grow like economy, like of South Africa, especially, how to grow South African economy. So one of the key things that made the economy of Ghana to grow fast, one of the key factors is good governance, right? So here in South Africa, we have policies that are for the people, but are not effective, mostly because of good governance, right? Because you have things like rural development, whereby they're supposed to build bridges, but you find that they're not building the bridges in Maliakewa. You have things, like a lot of things, like I can name a lot of things. For example, the Komani Stadium, there are a lot of things. So, also another thing is that, like, we have student leaders, okay, no, let me say leaders, right, that go from the ground. They are like ethical, they are ethical, they are so grounded, they are for the people, they are so motivated, and then when they get to a position of power, it's like they turn to a different person, yeah. So with all of that being said, how do we like emphasize good governance, you know, from this level now as students going up, because we're going to go to the outside world of work and other spaces. So how do we go about addressing like this matter of enforcing like good governance? Also, another question that I had is, let me just check. Okay, I can't seem to find the question. But, oh yeah, I found it, sure. So we have mic is on, okay, sure. We have spaces in South Africa, right? And also have political spaces. But then their opportunities for young people are very limited. Like it's very hard for young people to penetrate. You must ask yourself that Ramaphosa was the acting, was a speaker during the negotiations for ending of apartheid, but is only becoming president now. So we must ask ourselves that if you are coming from, imagine now you're a 21-year-old, you must wait for 40 years for you to become president. So, like, how do we create spaces for young people to be able to lead? Because right now, it's very difficult for young people to lead in South Africa. Like, how can we create spaces for young people to lead? Because I can be honest with you, we as young people, we know what's going on in our communities. We come from communities whereby we can see that if I had money, for example, I would build a road, proper road where I'm from, so that there could be tourists visiting there. Because I know for a fact there are tourist attraction places there, but it's just that the infrastructure is not proper. So if I had maybe like 1 billion yana, I'll build a proper road. Okay, I think that's my question. Thank you so much.
I think our last,
Thank you. Thanks, Umesh. My name is Luandile Msimang. I think me and Chisa are targeting Mr. Sebezo here. Mine goes to you as well. Because I think to me, both you and Mr. Gwala were tackling more or less from the same angle the issue of ownership as far as the economy is concerned. So I have interpreted you to say the status quo must change in favor of black ownership. Now, there's this issue that I have in relation to leadership and activism in a modern day society. Pre-democracy, during the apartheid days, youth of 1976, dated back, I don't know when, there was a common struggle, and that common struggle was the liberation of our people. Post-apartheid, we come to deal with this notion of activism now in the modern day society. To me, our youth is rather very polarized, because there is an introduction of another concept now, even within our youth or within the sectors of society. In fact, the black race in itself. The introduction of the term clever blacks in relation to activism. That is where I am going. To say within us as the black people, as you have spoken with reference to the president, that there are certain people within our race that gather favor of the system that continues to perpetuate subjugation of the black or African race. So where do we cipher now in relation to us being fully, 10 years from now, maybe 10, 20, 80% of us, the youth in this room, who will be identified as clever blacks? What then, where does that then take us in relation to our continued struggle for freedom and liberation economically as black people now? Because you know, clever blacks sit at the table with managers of the system and they wine and dine while people on the ground suffer. So I would wish you to address me there. Thank you, leadership.
Hi, I'm Yolanda Mnganeni, and we have a question from our YouTube Live. This is from Unkosekaya Makashu. Uti, how do we get the public, private sector, and higher institutions in sync to tackle unemployment and upskill the graduates in order for them to be employable? Thank you.
I think there was one more question from the floor.
Good afternoon. I'm Kopano Hendrik, and my question is forwarded to Mr. Sebezo. So, my question is based on the two concepts called equity and equality. Yeah. So my question says, would it be wrong? Why? And why does it make it so difficult for us to serve our societies in an equitable manner of approach, instead of us serving our societies equally, of which is what we're doing right now? The reason me asking this question, it is because I believe we are missing a holistic view when it comes to our societies. For example, South Africa is one of those countries whereby we're adopting certain policies from other countries, of which our country was never ever looked upon when those policies were drawn. Thank you.
Sorry, Mesh. Oh. Can I please go first so I can take the easy ones?
You're brutal, Chief, you're brutal. Me and you are from the same vantage point. You can assist.
Yeah. So, okay, I'll touch on, there was no question which was directed to me. So I have the privilege of cherry picking from the Lord. But I think there's a term that Fanon termed as bureaucratic bourgeoisies. The problem that we have on the continent is that the economy is so locked between the major powers that there's very little for black natives to actually tap into. So the political space thus becomes very competitive, because you know that once you get elected and you become a chairperson of this province, then there are a lot of opportunities that comes your way. So as much as it's a pandemic on its own, but it stems from the fact that for the past couple of centuries, black people in terms of opportunities, they've been subjugated. So now they've created this thing for themselves, whereby, for example, like you know that there are a lot of cases whereby in order for you to be a successful billionaire, it's proven that if you are black, you must have political connections. Because the Black Industrialist Program, which was championed by the former president, Thabo Mbeki, only produced a very few elite billionaires. So thus, the space of politics becomes extremely important on the continent, to a point whereby now leadership can actually be bought, because you know that if you invest R1 billion in a conference of the ANC, then you can actually tap into R1 trillion annual budget that you're going to get, and a lot more other resources. So the space becomes very difficult for anyone to penetrate because of such issues. That's why now we see sporadic movements which are cropping up all over the country. For example, we have Operation Tutula in the Arab countries with the Arab Spring, whereby we do not know who was leading those big movements, but there was action, because the traditional political space has been so closed to a point whereby entrance is very difficult for anyone to enter. So the quality of leadership now is not from the ground, but it's about who's more elite and who has more resources and who can actually now buy their way into power. And that's creating something called patriotism, whereby political powers now, they just have to maintain relations with a few individuals through patronage, and then in turn they get voted into power. So that's the big problem that we have on the continent. And in most cases, it usually stems even through ethnicity, that if you are from the majority in terms of ethnicity, for example, if you are a Shona in Zimbabwe, you know that you stand a better chance to become a president than Ndebele, because of those networks which are created because of patronage. So leadership has decayed over the past couple of years because we have lost those fundamental principles. So I want to touch on this thing of social compact because I see that it came up again in a different form in the discussions. There's something called NEDLEG, where all the different powers come in and they sit down to solve the problems of the country. For example, they are looking at curbing the high unemployment rate. But the problem with those setups is that, for example, SAIC is representing young people in NADLEG. The president of SAIC becomes an ex-officio to NADLEG, a delegate to the NADLEG gatherings. So the problem with that is that capital tends to influence even our so-called liberation progressive structures. So they go to that environment and then the ideas of the ruling class, which is the capitalist class, tend to supersede all the other ideas, and then the product that comes out of those gatherings is not what reflects what the people want, but it reflects what corporates and big multinational companies want. So I think we have that issue. So I think we need to create alternatives whereby you can do land or lima without being in a place whereby there's regulation which is skewed to other parts of society more than others. For example, we know that the UN is very inclusive, is known to be very inclusive. Every country is more to be officially a country must be part of the UN. But you know, within the UN, there's a UN Security Council, which has no African country which has a permanent seat. So even in NADLEG, there are those issues as well, which stem from such gatherings. For example, it's easy to capture just one. You know that if you capture just one president of COSATU, you take the president of SAIC, you have taken a huge part of the population. So that's why these corporates, they even fund these organizations when they go to conference, because they have intended views on what the outcome is supposed to be, because ultimately it must benefit them. So those are the issues that we have. I think I've dwelled on the economy, so I'll just leave it to Mr.
I'll be led by Mashallah, I don't know his direction.
Okay, there was a question that was posed by Usandisiwe to Usasetu with regards to how they can link with activism spaces, particularly during this process of COVID, and where they are unable to actually go to these spaces physically at some point.
Okay, so I mean, we've seen with the advent of COVID-19 that it has become a blessing and a curse. Blessing in the sense that you can now engage on international platforms in the comfort of your own room and not necessarily have to, you know, be there. So one of the activation agencies that I would recommend is Activate, which is a leadership agency, and I'm also a product of Activate, which was, you know, a real game changer in active citizenry. We have IALI, the Young African Leaders Initiative, that is...
Ubuntu's from there, by the way.
Ubuntu is IALI alumni. So you can also, you know, speak to Ubuntu, because IALI opens you up to a lot of other platforms for youth citizenry. There's, you know, the Black Management Forum, youth leadership programs. So literally, there is a myriad of them. I can't think of them from the top of my head. But also to just to touch on, you know, this topic of um, black bourgeoisies. You know, I work in business and I work a lot more with private than I do with government. And I found that, you know, this is an opportune moment for, as a young person, to actually help the private companies with their scorecards. If you are a young black person under the age of 35, you are a walking, you know, ticket. Not to be used as a front, but to get skills, to grow, to be a part of the internships and just, you know, get your foot into those internships and academies where you learn the practices and then implement them in your own spaces. So sometimes it just takes a place of positioning yourself, aligning yourself, and saying, okay, look, I am an asset. I'm going to take this pain point of the black Dunton and young youth unemployment and I'm going to position myself in a space that says, I am an asset to other private companies where they need me so that they can get their scorecards. I mean, I've partnered up with Abelungu Abadala, I don't want to say it in English, and Bakui E-level scorecards, it's unacceptable. So having me there is not only just so that it's debate front, but to also learn the functions of how business operates, how to lead and facilitate certain things, and then in turn, nabo, eyabo is scorecard sihle. So take advantage of that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Sasetu. I think you've touched on a very important space of partnering up in alignment with different industries and sectors. I think as one of the things that I got to learn as a former student, I'm still a student, but like one of the mistakes that I think we make is actually starting to look for partnerships after you graduate, which I think is a very big mistake. I think you need to start forming relationship of trust with different organizations and different societies whilst you are still studying. So I think that's very important there. There's a question that came from Ndomelele Chisa to Wandisile. He asked, how do we emphasize good governance, number one? And number two, the creating of spaces for young leaders. Spoke about our president. Took him almost 40 years. Did you say 40 years to become president?
That's Msimang, ne? Was it Msimang? Oh, jeez, okay, no thanks. No, I met Ubuntu in 2019 at the Yali initiative in Midrand. And while we were graduating there was a fellow from Johannesburg. I think we called him Soweto, from Soweto. We had a thing, if you're from Ghana, we call you Ghana. If you're from Zimbabwe, we call you Zimbabwe. And while we were graduating, this guy starts to sing. Asiwafuni agenda ya makapitali. And I said to him, Chief, this thing is sponsored by the Americans. Please, don't do this thing. But I'm saying it's a good program. So you say, approach it. We stay there. It's a residency program. You stay there for a month. You know, we almost didn't graduate because of that guy. No, thanks, Chisa. Ne? I think we need to strengthen our democratic institutions. It's not going to be an easy task. I agree. South African society is polarized. Elements of corruption are in government. They're in the ruling party even. So your parliament, your public protector institutions, perhaps they need to be non-partisan. Because we've seen that people who lead these institutions are comrades. They will say, Natsuku she's a law, has a law degree, but Utul is a comrade. We know that. You know what I'm saying? Let's capacitate our democratic institutions, especially the ones that hold those in office accountable. Let's capacitate them and hold and strengthen them more. You know, and also what you said there, Nachisa, remind me of the Freedom Charter. Not the Freedom Charter, sorry, the Strategy and Tactics document of the ANC. Through the eye of the needle, Dean. There are two questions there, two fundamental questions that document asks. What kind of society do we envisage? So we say we want an unracial society, and unsexist, and so on. And the follow-up question is, what kind of leadership will take us there? So I think besides the ANC asking itself that question in the early 2000s, I don't think that document is gathering dust now. But I think as a country, to address our social ills, such gatherings, we must ask ourselves that question, mashallah, that what kind of society do we want and what kind of leadership will take us there? So it's not going to be an easy task, Chisa, but it's a process that we must get into as South Africans. Thanks.
I think the next question is still towards you let me see, the issue of Ilendo clever blacks. How do we deal with the issue of clever blacks who want to wine and dine with leadership?
Proximity is key, Chief. They'll tell you. Ubuntu will tell you. You know, but that's why I said earlier on that, you know, these labels, I'm not a fan of these things, you know, but they are there. So we need to, you asked us who's the enemy. You asked us who's the enemy before 94, the enemy was apartheid. It was clearly defined then, the enemy. We were fighting apartheid. That the problem why we have clever blacks now is because the issues are vast. And there are some people, especially those who've struggled, those are older, must forgive me, Dean. That generation believes that they've arrived. They are middle class, they stay in Summerstrand. Tina, we take Algoa from here to what do we say, you know, things like that. So our objectives or our objectives are not the same anymore. We are divided. So, but I think, again, linking with what I said earlier on about strengthening democratic institutions, we need to cut against the grain, you know, in pushing, because if she might be labeled as an ultra-leftist, she spoke like Mkodama, did you hear? And that's a compliment. Andile is one of the leading authorities on black consciousness in the country. But when you're too radical, they'll say, no, she's an ultra-leftist. And we're too close to capital, I know, for the scorecard. They say you're a clever black, you're selling out. We understand? But if we know what we're doing, we can use our proximity to achieve what we want as a country. I'm answering you I'm floating, Simang. I'm not giving you specifics because I can't. I'll be putting myself on the block. I'll be failing. I don't want to do that. Because it's a difficult question. It's a difficult question. When I used to be a writer, the local newspaper back in Platt is called the Sea Express. CX is the number plate, the registration plate of Platinum McVeigh and Neisner. And I used to criticize the leadership a lot. And I was attacked by them, but when I criticizing us, was paid by these white people. I'm working for the municipality now. I'm still an opinion writer, I write sometimes. And I criticize the private sector because I'm from a different angle now. And the very same white people I used to, you know, they say, but this one now has changed. So we find ourselves in those positions, not because we want to be clever blacks, but we need to cut against the grain. They will always say something negative, but if you know that we are trying to change society for the better, might as well just do it, regardless of what they say. Thanks.
Thank you. Ayanda, could you please assist us with that YouTube question?
Must I repeat that question from you? Okay. Uti, how do we get the public, private sector, and higher institutions in sync to tackle unemployment and upskill the graduates in order for them to be employable?
I know the questioner. Kosekaya is a graduate of this institution. I think graduated last year in IT. He's my homeboy. So he's just being silly. But the question, linking to what Ukwala was saying earlier on about Bigo not being philosophized, the question should go to the deans, the black academics. Because Ukwala was complaining that in some circles, they are refusing to make Bigo a philosophy. But we've got black academics leading. So that question, we put it to the dean, must give the dean a chance to speak to. They must account. They must account. You know, they must account because really the curriculum, as you were saying, and that question are related. the outputs of university do not reflect what's happening on the economy. Someone was asking recently, Guti, it's a graduate season, and people are graduating, but where are the white graduates? We don't see their photos and stuff, but they're graduating as well. But then, Tina, we have to go and do internships. Infantoner goes back, goes in and just becomes a manager. You know, so these are the structural issues that we need to address. It's also linked to ownership of the economy. There's what we call social capital in the white spaces. White people believe in that thing. If you went to Grey, and 10 years later you need a job, and your body was at Grey, or his father was at Grey, whatever, Pretoria Boys High and all those things, you get a job easily. They capitalize on social capital. Tina, as black people, we don't have resources. So there's no capital we can socialize, we can capitalize on. So, but it's a struggle that we should say now that it's Freedom Day, that the struggle continues to do exactly those things, to change. I don't Gwala wants to come in.
Yeah, no, is it okay? No, I just want to speak on this thing of social capital and how it's important, especially in those spaces. For example, you'll find out that this residence was previously called Xanadu. I'm sure somewhere in the world there's a Xanadu club of former students from the old UPE that gather every now and again in those spaces. But the issue with us is that in terms of our schools, especially our black institutions, we for example, I read recently that in terms of databases, in terms of the alumni, the previously black institutions such as Univan, they struggle to compile such accurate databases, and those things are important so that even amongst ourselves, we have different skills, we can come together and assist each other to tackle the challenges that you might have. So those spaces, as much as you might find them not to be of importance, can be even much more important than the classroom, the people that you interact with every day. Your friends are going to be your customers in the future. When you are producing something, they are going to form a clientele around them. So every interaction is basically important, and we need to treasure that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think there was a last question from Okopano Hendricks, where she was rather posing the question of equity versus equality and an approach of dealing with social problems.
We'll be repeating ourselves here. Thanks for the question. It deals with ownership of the economy and the land question. There can never be social cohesion in an unequal society. Can never be. We can come here as one decision of Peter. But from here, I'm not the quality past day what to is. Peter goes to Summerstream. And the situation when I get there, what to is, it changes for me. So there can never be social cohesion in an unequal society. We have to deal with inequality. And unfortunately, in South Africa, it's got a color. If you're black, you're poor. If you're white, you're well off, relatively. Then few people like Obundu, are moving up the ladder, but the majority of us, I told him I'm going to get him. The majority of us, South African society, we are barely making ends meet. Our people are really working for transport. Some take 2 taxis, for the taxis from a Motherwell to a terminals again to a university. So I think we must deal with the economic question structurally, so that we can achieve inequality. Thanks.
Okay, before I take the second round, I also just want to speak on the issue of social capital, which is something that I have mostly always engaged on. Because, we tend to complain a lot as the black children. I'm not saying we complain without reason, but we tend to complain a lot about Ofartonde and hiring their own children. I mean, come on, guys, as if you would not hire your own child. I mean, we need to be practical with certain things. Just as much as, yes, I agree, there is a social responsibility of those who have to take into account social reconciliation because of our history. But there are other things that we can actually do. Also say to Olwam, they have nothing, but they've started businesses of their own because they have an intention to upskill and empower the people behind them. Ne? So we have to change our mindset. I think there's a need for us to change our mindset to make ourselves employers instead of employees. And Dean, a part of that is the education that we receive in this institution of higher learning. You teach us to be employees. No one teaches us that the education that we have actually capacitate us to go into our neighborhoods and actually upskill our neighborhoods and protect our neighborhoods. Everyone tells us, if you go to any what do they call it? Career day. During career day, you are basically taught that as soon as you are done with your education, you have to go there. No one gives you a career day for entrepreneurs to tell you, Uba, no, actually, you can actually be your own employer. With that said, because yes, I think sometimes we become very illogical at times. I mean, I will hire my son if my son qualifies for a job. So will the white person. Yeah, let us take the second round of hands. One there. 2, 3, sorry, 4, 5 next to you. Okay, 6 with the dean. Okay,
To actually hold the administration of the country and to keep the political economy stable. So part of the statements that Tina as the youth usually say in South Africa is that presidents are only front men to actually distract us in knowing who exactly is running the country. And it came into my attention that in a neoliberal capitalist country, which is South Africa, that is exactly true. And I would like to know as to whether or not will it be possible for us to give room to other political organizations or political oppositions to say, perhaps if we give them room, they will be able to hold the administration of the country in trying to keep the political economy stable. Thank you very much.
Sorry, please mention your name before the question. I think your names are very important and they need to be noted.
Okay. My name is Luzu Kwambumbulwana. Now I think I just want to make a small contribution. But now my point of view or kind of perspective is that the emphasis should be made on where knowledge production is. If we want as a society to have a common vision now in this modern society, in the sense that the Vile Yonke Futi, also the conversation being central to the economic setup, which I think also is the major factor to how our society is now. Ne? So I think if we focus mostly on creating that vision in the centers of knowledge production, ne? But we want to have a society where we don't have a color in terms of poverty. When you talk about poverty in South Africa, and you generally just know about, okay, ne? Also, I think that economic setup as a whole, I don't want to say it's pointless, mhlambi, to even want to tackle zonke ezazinto ezenza uba, okay, to remain, that we remain in this position of subjugation, even in the modern society. But I do think now from where I stand, this space, especially university, it's a space that is very open for us to engage on a plan of action on how to organize ourselves as Black people and how we would want to change the circumstances zethu. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Before we go to the third question, I just want to unpopularize myself and just request that we just shoot the question.
Greetings to the House at Large. I'm Ovayo Mhlanga. And firstly, I'd start by saying, believe in a century or a generation whereby education is just a system, and when you get out of being educated, let me say the higher institution, it's not a matter of what you know, but a matter of who you know. So we are faced with challenges of having to equip ourselves with things that might be initially equipped in us from primary. Because you'd see that NMU, for instance, is like taking a lot of people, or let me say students, because we were fought for this, like freedom and free education and everything. But the question arises, it will arise and be like, okay, fine, now we're all gonna be educated. Where are we going to go after that? So education systems have to be changed. Maybe like things should now be focused on the practicality of how much each individual is gifted. And maybe let's now, because education is not like plan A, if I may say. I think it'd be better if it was a second option than a first option as it is made. And then secondly, I'd go to political parties. Most and more often, I always have a question in my mind of, we have a lot of political parties in South Africa, and what arises in me is, who funds them? Where do they get the money? Because you'd see that most political people are so rich. And you'd see that we have a number of graduates that are sitting doing not that they're doing nothing, but because there are no jobs. And like, who funds those people? Instead of more political parties being created, can't there be any like organizations or systems that are created to help enable graduates find jobs? And another thing I was gonna wanted to talk about is the thing that the white monopoly created. I believe that the white systems came here for their survival, and the moment they came here to colonize and to do whatever that they did, they focused on the mentality, the mind. Because you'd see that you try by all means, or yes, Blacks are trying and we are trying, but the problem is the mind. Because now what they did was to put segregation in the mind. Because you'd see that maybe with school here in the higher institution or in the workplace, and you'd see that white people get more preference than Black people. And even if you are like maybe doing something that is even better than what that white person is doing. So I think in a way, they planted a seed of segregation in the mind, which is now what is very hard to like deregister or whatever. Thank you.
We are pressed with time, ne? So those who have contributions, I would implore you to either keep them at a very minimum, or you can actually just write those down, ne? And actually send them. Okay, I've been given leeway to allow you to speak, but still, please, if you have a contribution, just keep it short and just keep it to the point. You may go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Standing before you is Onesi Ponelani. Mine is a bit of a contribution and a question to Mr. Sebezo. Okay. Mine is not so deep. Oh, yeah. But I just, you asked why are there so many graduates that are unemployed, right? I, for one, for example, in my experience, I'm not a graduate yet. I'm still doing my second year. But so during, I matriculated in 2020. So in my school, we couldn't have career day and stuff like that for matriculants, right? So I applied for my degree, which is psychology, only to be disappointed. And in the prospectus, it's written 3 years. So I had a life plan and all after those 3 years. But okay, girl, it's gonna do A, B, C, D. After 3 years, only to be disappointed. The lecturers informed us, but it is compulsory to do degree, honors, and masters. You can't do anything with a degree. It's equivalent to like a matric results. You can just go work at ShopRite. And then honors, the options are so limited. Yeah, well, so they take like over 500 students for the undergraduate. My question is why? Why do you take so many? Because in the end, there will only be like 5 psychologists. I'm just making an example with my degree. I've seen that there's a number of courses that have the same problem as well. And then my second one would be, I had a classmate, for example, who was very good with handwork, right? Academically, he wasn't so stable, but he made me think of, Bana, why can't we have systems, it correlates with the question that she was asking, why can't we have systems that will take students from high school and help them or fund them to become their own entrepreneurs? Yeah, so basically it's around about that. Thank you.
Apparently, Dean, you are going to answer that question.
Yes.
Not yet.
It's complex, Dean, it's complex.
Greetings again. My name remains Vaiti Mahlangu. Mr. Sebezo, I am partially captured along with the lady that was sitting next to me.
Captured?
Partially captured. She was asking about equity and the difference between equity and equality, right? You spoke about factors such as land and other things, but I think that those are secondary to policy. Let's discuss policy as a root cause for all these issues everyone is mentioning. You understand? White people wouldn't have so much leeway if the Constitution didn't allow so. So can you please answer that question on a policy level? Thank you.
Hey, I'm glad I'm not a panelist. Eh? Number 6.
Thank you very much. My name is Trokolo Ramtlali. I just have 3 or 4 questions. The first question that I have is directed to, I didn't get the name, my lady in the middle. So I want to ask, what is the moral obligation directed towards the activism? By that I mean like, what moral obligation do we have as people who are willing to do citizenship activism? And then the second question is directed to the economy of South Africa. I don't know who will answer that, but I just want to ask, instead of subsidies, why can't we have mass production that the government will allow those subsidies that they want to give to businesses by creating or by producing more goods that they will make or give to the economy so that the black economies can grow. And the last question I have is directed to, I didn't get the name, Obaba Pa. I didn't get the name, sir. It's directed to you. It's in relation to the clever blacks, but then it's not the same. So what I want to ask is, if we do have clever blacks, if we do have them, and then we want to solve clever blacks, yes, we will have many strategies to say, if your boss is bossing you at work, you must not allow, you must sacrifice one for the many. But then, how do we solve clever blacks while seeking for economic power as blacks who are poor? And then another one is also directed to my lady. I just want to ask, what is the influence of family work? And family work, I also include illegitimate family creation members, I mean teenage pregnancy. What is the influence of family work and leadership that can hamper the advancement of women in either their education, career advancement, or whatever advancement they may wish to have? What is the influence of that? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can move to the dean. Let's move to the dean in the front. Dean, please keep your question to a maximum of 2.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure whether I've got a question, Mashallah. Thanks to the panel. I think, judging by the quality of questions and commentary from the audience, I think you've done a wonderful job. I just want to raise 2, 3 issues. Of course, they are general. I think one, maybe it was good, Bernard, that the topic was leadership and activism in a modern society, which has allowed us to traverse different topics at the same time. I'm saying that's the good side, but the downside to that is we may have to then, out of this session, say these are the 5 issues going forward in terms of the series that we really need to focus on. And I think I would want to suggest that perhaps the first one is that of education, because I think we are scratching the surface in terms of really unpacking the fundamental purpose of education, not just higher education, but education in a South African society or in an African context. For instance, I mean, because it's 100 years of Julius Nyerere this year, especially this month, we were turning 100. Not sure how many of you know Julius Nyerere. But then I had to take the responsibility of going through his writings. And then in 1968, he coins this concept of education for self-reliance, and he properly defines it. And that's what some of us are talking about here. But you can't define education for self-reliance if you have not charted your agenda as a country and if you are not coherent, which comes back to the question you have the 2 questions you asked about the type of society we want to create and the type of leadership that ought to take us that ought to take us there. So let me just park that, which then brings me to the second question. What is the nature of the problem in relation to young people? You have got young people, Asemahle, who are critical, but post their university life, activist life. I mean, I had some of them, Fees Must Fall activists, who asked me to be their referee. And then they say, no, Dean, but this thing of me being a Fees Must Fall activist must not count. Never mention it. And yet, if you look at my CV has got it all my activism, because I'm not ashamed about who I was and who I have become. So in relation to the youth and their activism, as well as their consistency and inconsistency in their journey, what is the problem? What is it that leads? Especially, I think some of you spoke about, and again read, but I can't find this speech now, but maybe you can find. I think TM 5, 6, 7 years ago spoke to the Kenyan youth about the point that some of you were talking about. I mean, Asemahle. If you trace all revolutions, all successful revolutions, they were led by young people. Why? Because they have got nothing to lose. I think somebody spoke about that. And Tia makes this point that the higher you go, you become conservative. It's natural. You know, I don't know how do these conservative ideas develop, which is why all revolutions, not a single one, all revolutions have always been led by young people. But now, an antithesis to that theory is you have got now these young people who are so inconsistent at their youth stage when they are supposed to be so consistent. But not just consistent, but grounded on a very clear philosophy, theory, and so on. So that's what I find quite and now you're talking about this thing of proximity and so on. At least those young people that I work with, they know that I always say to them, no, speak your mind. Let's contest ideas, and so on. Don't be submissive. And then the last point, and then again, this goes back to this point I'm making. I'm just being critical deliberately about inconsistency. Beautiful Fees Must Fall movement with various objectives partially achieves one and betrays the other or the rest. Let me provoke you. Betrays the rest and betrays what I thought was core. The decolonization or the Africanization of the curriculum completely fails to appreciate the complexity of that agenda. You see, the function of curriculum is a function of exclusion or inclusion in terms of what should be taught or not to be taught. You decide what to include or not to include, exactly your point about Bigo. But it doesn't end there. You look at the entire value chain, from who teaches, who is taught, to the person who produces textbooks that are to be taught. So it's the entire cycle. You can't tackle only in terms of what is taught.
Who was questioning a government in a way, but now how poverty could still exist under a constitution admired around the world. Yabo? So, we should look if we need to rewrite the constitution here to the justice system, or what we should do. And that's not why, am I making sense? Or yeah. I'm so nervous. And to the House, what I want to say is that we might have limits as we are saying, right? We might have a lot of questions, we might have a lot of issues that are limiting us to work towards what we want. But regardless of that, be fearless in pursuing what sets your soul on fire. Nkosi.
Good afternoon, everyone. In the interest of time, thanks to all the speakers, and I made notes and so forth, and I'd like to challenge the young people behind me. When all has been said and done, when all the policies are there and Udin has fought and the structures and, mine is to say, may we please have revitalized energy to become custodians and the gains of democracy. You know, panel, I was saying this morning, when you drive into campus and you see bottles, and it's predominantly black people, we are concurring with what Ofervoet said, that there is no need to educate the black mind beyond menial labor. Xa nisenza ezo zinto ninxile on campus, in front of the offices of the very people, you're going against days like this. So ndicela isazela that days like this came at a cost. I'm not going to judge your lifestyle, but when it starts imparting and impacting on why you came here, we must have a different conversation. Singahlala apha sibe nee-panels nakayi-20, if we are not willing to be the change that we want to see, all of this is in vain. Ndiyanicenga kuloo nto leyo. Ndicela when we have another class of graduates, nezimilo zethu zigraduate. Even the manner in which we speak to each other and in leadership, I'm not saying don't be assertive, but i-arrogance yethu xa uthetha nomntu omkhulu macace uba uphuma ekhayeni. Then we no longer become certificated, but we become educated, because the education is supposed to change the paradigm. Nendlela esenza ngayo izinto. So may we never forget, Freedom Day 2022, that ndizenza idini mna, I'll become the change that I want to see over and above yonke into ethethwe apha. Enkosi kakhulu.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question was to the first panelist. Whereas you identified yourself as a left-leaning individual, and the reaction that comes with regards to activism from the right side of the political spectrum is that, especially from Jordan Peterson, he says that activism is one step away from a vigilante group. So how would you tackle that question of the statement?
Activism is one step away to vigilante.
Yeah, to a vigilante group.
I'm wondering whether the Marshall Abaye, as a leader of the Fallist movement, was a vigilante.
No, he says that, how would you tackle that question of that statement, whereas he says that, yeah, what I've said. And also I would like to note what the Dean of Students said at the beginning, whereas he said that we must go away from using technical jargons when we are dealing with development, so that they can become simple, and that the locals or perhaps the people who are supposed to be benefiting from development issues can appreciate and participate, and so that they must be simple. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we should move to our panelists and take into consideration the time frame under which we operate in Uba Ninglechisan and answering the questions, and not necessarily stick to one person.
So who's starting?
I think.
No, let me start. Let me start, and I leave everything to Ukwala. No, let me go to Elijah. Your question about the owners of the country and the ones who are governing reminds me of a discussion Tabombeki's younger brother, Pramulitz, made on ENCA some time ago, that there is a difference between those who are governing and those who are ruling class. And he categorized them, that the ruling elite, the ruling class is not actually the ANC, the ruling part. It's those who own the means of production. Your big insurance company is listed on the JSE. In fact, you guys are also part of the ruling class because are entering the middle class, middle strata phase because the economy cannot function entirely without without certain professions like your doctors and so on and so on. So I agree with you, Chief. In all economies, there's always that conflict of those who own the country by way of owning the means of production and those who govern on behalf of the ruling elite. But as opposed to the alternative to the ruling ANC in China, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm a strong critic of the ANC, but let me confess as well, I'm a member of the ANC. You know, so I'm not going to say there's an alternative to the ANC. Currently, there isn't. In the last local government elections, or before the national elections, before this one, 2019, a left bloc came together by way of a breakaway from Kosatu. It was led by NUMSA. They started what we call, it was thrown in PE, if I remember correctly, United Front. It was led by Abu Ivan Jim and them. It was an alternative, it was trying to be an alternative to the ANC. And I was watching with keen interest how they're going to emerge because it would have been, had they emerged proper, it would have been a proper alternative to the ANC. So I don't think currently there is an alternative to the ANC. There are many faults within the ANC. I want to admit as a member, the ANC is not perfect. But honestly, what is the alternative to the ANC political, in terms of political parties? I'm yet to be convinced. Perhaps that's a conversation, Elijah, we should take. On the question of Luzuko universities being centers of knowledge production should be key before the economy. I don't agree. They work together in a way because universities serve the economy. Universities exist to serve the needs of the economy. Hence, I asked in my earlier remarks, when I was doing my opening remarks, why, and vice versa, why is the university not producing, let me call graduates, that are not absorbed by the economy? And why is the economy not absorbing the output of the universities? And the dean has said that it's a complex issue, and it is. And he has mentioned the value chain of why these things are happening. So mine is that they overlap, you know. It's not that the university comes first, then the economy. They feed each other. But my main point is that universities serve the needs of the economy. So if the needs are to serve those who own, who are white, unfortunately, in South Africa, the university will serve there, but that's where money is in. I'm just going through now because Mashallah said it must just answer. On the issue of subsidies versus, there was a question about mass production. You came late, Chief. Yeah, you came late. Leadership. On my opening remarks, I did address the issue of a service-based economy versus a manufacturing one. And I'm arguing for a manufacturing one. I even said that we have more people with laptops and corner offices that are not necessarily, you know, needed for the kind of economy that we have. You know, because I even said that in the mining sector, we export our raw materials without value. They go create jobs elsewhere instead of being processed locally and strengthen our manufacturing base. So I agree with you there. We don't need to focus on the service, more on service-based economy, but on the manufacturing one. The dean touched on a number of issues. And I want to challenge the generation that Dean belongs to. Young people are inconsistent. I agree. I'm a young person as well. As I said before, when I was writing independently in the private media, I was attacking the government. Now I'm working for the municipality in Platte. I'm now defending the municipality. You know, so there is that inconsistency. But the question is, what is your generation doing to mentor us? The onus is on you as well. You need to mentor young people and lead them in a straight direction, as Usisi was saying. And on the issue of clever blacks, are we saying clever blacks are sellout? I'm missing the point there, mashallah. I thought being a clever black was asking questions and being radical, you know, and then we are classified in that particular band. I'm not sure whether we are saying they are sellouts, but that's another conversation. Thanks.
thank you to the questions. Just to add on to what my panelist has mentioned, you know, when I was in varsity, I remember when I was in second year, I used to work in retail at Greenacres. Not because, you know, I was struggling or having any super intense kind of hardship, but because I just wanted money, you know. I wanted to emancipate and free myself, so I found that if I want money, my parents can't afford to give me money. The money I get from my bursary was 550, where I had to buy groceries, toiletries, and all those things and sustain myself for a month. It wasn't viable. So I went out and got a job as a shop, a salesman. So I would finish my class here at 1:30 and catch the bus up at South Campus. I work until 5 o'clock and then until 7 o'clock on Fridays. And then on weekends I'm working, and if I'm not working, I'm studying. And there were no opportunities or the great escape or things that, you know, we are looking for. You make things happen for yourself. Fast forward, those are the skills that I use and implement in my business today. That if I want something, I go out and I get it. If, for example, we hosted the Mandisi Jantjies concert last year. Mandisi Jantjies is an artist from Port Elizabeth, has never once performed in his hometown because no producer wanted to pay for the amount that he was charging. So we knocked on doors at local municipalities, and they all said, no, that's crazy, we're not going to pay for it. And then I went out and looked for national funding and looked for international funding and made it happen. So this rhetoric or this narrative of how do we get people to make things happen for us also kind of needs to come to a halt and say, how can I make it happen? Because I am the one who has capacity to make things happen for myself. So just on that there. And then when it comes to education, not only to add once again to that, helps us in a theoretical context, because I'm in media and communications. I mean, do I apply the agenda setting theory or the hypodermic needle theory in my everyday life? No, not necessarily. However, being a critical thinker and understanding how to construct things and how, when I put together proposals, how I put together the writing and the wording and all of that has been contributed by the way I was trained as a media and communication specialist. So taking what you have learned, applying what you know, or applying what you go out and study will then make you a formidable force. So instead of trying to fight this white capitalism and this and that, be a black capitalist. Create systems that create you wealth and get other people to make you wealthy with them, and not necessarily constantly, you know, be wanting to be accepted and wanted, and that's rubbish. So moral obligation to active citizenship. I think in terms of moral obligation, it teaches us a set of values, as I had mentioned in the talk, that strengthens us in a way that we might not necessarily have been tested in. We are in academic institutions, so we're trained academically, but being an active citizen makes you understand the complexities that are happening in the community and in the society that you are in. It enhances your leadership capabilities in a way that no textbook would have ever been able to teach you. And it also then strengthens you and makes you a more holistic person. You know, when I receive all these internship CVs, and then I always go to the hobby section, and I see hobbies, more reading, singing, cooking, and dancing. Those aren't hobbies, because there's nothing that you do outside of what you have studied. So having those external skills hone and strengthen you to be a better individual, not only for the job market, but if push comes to shove, to become a better creator of your own wealth, or to become a better entrepreneur, because you would have skills that you might not necessarily have been taught in class, but that you have been honed in by being a part of these different societies. And then also, the influence on career when it comes to, was it family? Yeah, so now we find ourselves in an ecosystem where women aren't necessarily meant to do it all. We can do it all, but not at the same time. If we find ourselves having a child maybe prematurely or being put back because of our duties, then we find an ecosystem that helps us perform optimally. That means you don't have to be the person who cooks, who cleans, and all of those things, whereas you can find people to outsource particular things too. And that is the spirit of Ubuntu and community, in fact, that when you are finding yourself in that position, look for a strong circle around you that can help you or alleviate the load in certain things, and will definitely be able to do better going forward. Thank you.
Thanks. I think a lot of questions have been covered by my fellow panelists, so I'll just be very short. I think the Dean asked a very difficult question in terms of how young people are not consistent. I think it's one of the very nature of young people because most of them, by the time that they're engaging in battle, they have not yet yielded any experience. So that must be, I agree that it must be supplemented by the previous generations. And also what I've noticed, especially on the continent, especially around the Arab Spring, in a lot of revolutions that take place, or even massive protests, I remember there was this Bobby Wine in Uganda who was facing head-on Museveni. The problem with these protests is that maybe sometimes they are centered around individuals, or when they are not centered around individuals, they are centered around narrow ideas to achieve certain objectives in the immediate. So what is good about a political organization is that it looks at the much broader spectrum. The manifesto touches on everything, and there are decision-making processes that get individuals to that manifesto. And in most cases, especially pertaining to leadership, there are people that take responsibility. For example, now, no one took responsibility for FISMA's fall. It's just known that young people in South Africa, so when important decisions had to be made, that decentralization, it allowed reactive forces to find openings to come and dismantle the protest. Because once they identified a few individuals, and then the protest collapsed because it had no unifying ideas that go beyond just the scope of an individual as a person, or just that narrow of goal of saying a free education. And then what becomes of free education when we get there is not specified. So that's why I'm saying that as much as political parties in South Africa, as I outlined before, that there's a serious barrier to entry, because in order for you to register with the IEC, you need this X amount of money. So it's people that have the resources that are able to form political parties. But as problematic as that may be, I think they still are the only, I can say, hope in terms of us going through this thing. We call it, in political science, we call it procedural democracy, whereby every year we go and put an X there. So I think that is still the best form of democracy that we're supposed to have. Unlike this one, whereby someone can just bring up, they ban places, they achieve what they want to achieve, and then what becomes of the revolution after that, then it becomes very difficult to answer. We have seen it in Libya. The goal was to oust Muammar Gaddafi, and it's been more than 11 years after the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi with the assistance of NATO, but there's no stable government in Libya today. But had Libyans been patient enough to go to elections and elect a president of their choice, I think the situation would have been better, because now we find the situation whereby there are different governments in one territory. The north is governed by this rebel group, the south is governed by this other grouping that is recognized by the UN. So then it becomes a protracted conflict between the two centers of power. So it's a very difficult question with this thing of inconsistency. And I don't think that there's anything that can alleviate it besides being organized through some form of a constitution with rights and responsibilities that are in line with our constitution. As much as it has that problematic section 25 that we all lament, but still very much a very important document in terms of how the world and the country is governed. So I won't dwell much on we've touched on mass production, beneficiation. And also, I just want to touch on, there's a comrade who mentioned Jordan Peterson. So I think he's a Canadian psychologist. Yeah, when we all don't like him.
It's very problematic. that guy.
So I think there's a debate which I would love to reference. It's between Jordan Peterson and Slovak Zizek. So I think that debate is very important, especially around these discussions that we're having. I think it's on about 10 million views or something crazy like that. It's a debate between socialism and capitalism. And Zizek is known to be this rock star philosopher who's more aligned to the left, and then we have Jordan Peterson. So at least it gives us a view from different worldviews. But it's been a very fruitful engagement. You know, like there were a few lectures which I did a couple of months ago in the political science class, the second year political science class. And I used to speak and speak and speak there, and for like 20 minutes, and I stopped to allow questions, and then no one was engaging. And when we went to a meeting, departmental meeting, the same problem was occurring to everyone, because I thought it was me, because maybe I'm junior, so I'm not doing it in a proper way. But when I heard that it's a problem across the faculty, lecturers are just lecturing there on Zoom, and then it ends there. So I was very happy to see such high levels of engagements, whereby we noted hands, and everyone was just free. It speaks on the essence of having Imbadu, that anyone is free. It's an exchange of ideas. No one is an authority on anything. So I could see that if sometimes there were differing views that came from the floor, which were now being posed to us, and that is a good thing, and that's how people grow. That's how we're going to develop and be greater human beings for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Asemahle. We really are out of time. And Udin pointed it out correctly that one of the consequences of having such a topic is that there were so many inputs that came in, which some you might think that are not really associated with the topic in itself, but it shows there is a spirit of Imbadu within the audience and everyone who attended, which is very great. We've touched on a lot of issues, and we don't have much time to go to every single one of them, but there were a lot of issues that were touched on, and one of the things that was also touched on is the question, rather, of who are these knowledge producers of this curriculum that we want. And I remember my time as a Fees Must Fall activist. When we were asked that question, we told them straight out, we don't care. We don't care how this thing must be done. It must just be done. And then after that, you find that the people who actually went on and write these books are actually the children of the same politicians that were protesting against. They are the ones who are waiting whilst we are protesting to actually write books about this whole event. So it's one of the most important things when you are engaged in any struggle of what sorts, to actually analyze and actually ask yourself, Nyanuba, how are you going to achieve this thing that you want to achieve? Let me not waste more time. Let us just give one last applause to the panelists. Thank you very much. I think Ogo Etusaskenzile, we will give it to Ubuntu.
Thanks. Good morning, Mesh. He's got a YouTube channel, by the way. Good morning, Mesh. I was once interviewed there, but to be interviewed, you have to run a 5K. So I did that I did it in 45 minutes, no? About 50. But I must dispel the notion that Wandile is saying that I am rich. You're going to make fun as a scape chief. I'm not very close to that. Mine is very short for now. It's to give to our immediate boss as the Madibaz Youth Lab, Dr. Bernard Sibake, to touch upon a few things about the lab, and then to also give a vote of thanks. He'll be very brief. Most of you have seen him on news. He's an analyst as well, but he's going to be very quick now. We're running out of airtime. Thanks.
Molweni nonke. I was intrigued by everyone introducing themselves. Bathetha namadlozi. Ndithe ndiyenze njalo nami. Nna ke sebaka tšhona sa mangwato a mogale. Ke mogaditse ke se gametse mo nepenepeng. Ba re ke mogaga ke setlolo sa bagaga. Bagaga ba mmakubela. Ba roka ba metse ya pula. That's what it means to be in an African university. I feel very proud the way I introduced myself. I did not sell myself short, and at least those who did not hear me, they will remain inquisitive to want to know what exactly was he saying. But I was more happy to realize that I'm not alone. There are those who can relate to what I'm talking about. I was limited time. I'm going to make sure that indeed in 5 minutes I finish. But normally I take my time. There's no free lunch in Mandela University right in. I wouldn't have, mind to talk when people are busy eating. Because I can compete with that item. Madibaz Youth Lab. I think it's important to reflect that today it's a very pinnacle moment. The Freedom Day, 28 years back. Today, a new baby on board, it's here, Madibaz Youth Lab. One of the viewers on YouTube asked a very pertinent question. Kudala sithetha lento ukuthi masibe ne-stake kwi-economy. Abantu bethu mabakhululeke. Bakhululekile na. I think let's stop talking. Let's start doing. Now, there's a lot of rich, realistic and sophisticated analysis came out of our speakers. Live realistic issues. But what must appeal to us is that when we move out of that door, is it going to be doom and gloom? Sizawudibana next sithethe enye into ukuthi kuzawuba ne follow up on what we have learned to be united in purpose and ensure that we do something for ourselves. Ayizasinceda lento that sithi irhulumente ayisenzeli. Thina, what are we doing for ourselves? That's what Madibaz Youth Lab is asking. It's about yourselves. We want to interface with you when you've got an idea that can contribute towards addressing all these issues that our panelists, the questions that you asked, do you think you don't have the answer? Don't underestimate your capacity, united as you are. Sizawutya next door, Luto. That does not talk about the kind of nation that we want to build. Mandiyeke apho, because ndingathetha up until the sun set and rise. Let me indicate that there was one question which I think it was very pertinent to myself and my colleagues in the youth lab, that where do we find these opportunities to participate? We will communicate exactly in terms of where you'll find us. We want all students with innovative ideas to approach us. We'll support that. We will also come and knock at yourselves in order to come forward